It's really wonderful to be with you. And look at, we're filling up all the seats here. And there are more and more and more people who are turning out for these talks. We've just been amazed as we go along because there is this deep, deep yearning inside of us for peace. A deep desire to move past a world that's filling each other with terror, fear, debt, chaos. And I think all of us really sense deep down within us that it is going against what we were created to do, and that we are created to live in harmony with all people. I love the new kind of theology that's coming out now, cosmic theology, and it's something that not only all Christians would agree with in some way or the other, but ties into many Eastern religions as well. And that is that there is just one huge universe out here, maybe beyond, and it goes on. The Hubble's going up again. We're going to spend, I don't know, millions or billions of dollars keeping it going, but how much it has opened our eyes to the vastness of the universe. And yet, I love the Stephen Hawking, and I understand that last I heard he was in the hospital and he has ALS. He's the one who came up with the kind of Big Bang. Now, John Deere, trust a Jesuit to always set you straight. Because I talked about the Big Bang, and he says, wait a minute. Stephen Hawking says, no, it was really a little bang. I said, John, don't take that away from me. But anyway, well, it's still there. It might not be a big bang. It's a little bang. That's maybe more significant. But that all of creation comes from this initial source of energy that comes into the universe and creates this infinitely wide universe that seems to even be expanding millions of light years away. And we learned early on, light years, the speed of light, 168,000 a second, times squared, it's just so huge. And the universe extends out there in this awesome mystery. But a friend of mine, a young Franciscan, was driving a minivan around Berkeley in order to make money to go to seminary, go to school. And he had the job for a couple of weeks of driving Stephen Hawking around to Cal Berkeley and otherwise. And he's just a brilliant man, but he is a total paraplegic and can only talk through kind of like a few sounds, which Pat kind of helped him with. So Pat said to him, well, Mr. Hawkins, with this, all sorts of creation comes from this Big Bang. Well, where was God in that? And Hawkins said, well, when the Big Bang went off, there was God. Just this flick of the finger is what he gave. That's where God was. In other words, this incredible creation that goes on beyond our even most infinite imagination comes from this energy that comes out, and that's where we find the Creator. And that Creator is creating out of goodness. That the universe is basically good. And we can take out a O in the good and call it God, or we can call it good, or we can change it into Yahweh or Jehovah, or many, many creator, creatoress, mother, father. We can call it all sorts of names and give it all kinds of descriptions. But basically, there is this incredible goodness of energy that unites all of creation. And even those of us who are in the Catholic Church, Pope Benedict, in his encyclical last year on hope, I read it in jail. Somebody sent it to me issue by issue. If you ever really want to read an encyclical, go to jail, because somebody said nobody ever reads an encyclical. Well, they don't get it in jail issue by issue, or they would read it. But anyway, he talks about hope and how we're all destined for the new creation, the new heavens and the new earth. All of us and all creation will be transformed in some way we cannot even imagine. But we see it as all that we could possibly hope for and much more, or all that we've ever experienced in terms of magnificence and love and goodness. Some say that energy is, we would like to call it love. Compassionate love. Not love that's kind of greedy and I've got to have it, I've got to have my fix. But love that is reaching out to one, to another, and to all that we can encounter in this incredible creation. And we are all created out of an infinitely integrated existence, kind of like a huge universal nervous system, living system. They call them living systems. And all is created to live in harmony. And the way to do that is to continue to, like with your own body, to kind of open up the paths of energy that flow through you and flow through us. And that's what I love about coming to these gatherings, because here are people who have come together and got at least a lot of it together. Nobody came in here out of hatred and meanness and evil, or greed even, because you're not going to get anything you can take away with you unless you have to, shell out a little bit for it to share with somebody else to be able to provide more. Although I did get some wonderful cookies made by Judy over here. She shared this room. We shared this room together, and she keeps going, well, I don't know what keeps you going. You don't eat, you don't sleep, you don't. So she brings me these wonderful, enticing cookies to keep me going. But that's all of these little tiny acts is what keeps the universe going. So why don't we open this up? Well, now, Einstein told us about this universe that, we can make it an energy. He calls it E equals mc squared. See, Father, I remember that Jesuit lesson you taught us back there in high school. E equals mc squared. Energy, the speed of light squared, which is huge, 186,000 a second times squared. I have a friend who was an atomic physicist and was all into this Star Wars stuff and all that. We were on exactly the same path. We saw the awe of this same universe that we see. And that out of that energy, we can actually create an energy that can blow up all of the creation that we know. And we're coming kind of close. We have probably about 35,000 nuclear weapons here and there, 10 or 15,000 on alert, plenty more stored away. And we've already passed to Congress, in the last Congress, a resolution to rearm all of them, tens of billions of dollars, maybe $1 trillion, something like that. With the new GPS systems and all that, we can make nuclear bombs that we can get right in there, right? So exact. I know my brother-in-law might say he got a Lexus and he could park his car in his garage with his GPS system. But imagine then you can certainly hit, I don't know, the Ayatollah's bedroom or something. And yet that same energy, according to Einstein, is only met and matched and exceeded by spiritual energy. Yes, physical energy can go off in this. A friend of mine, who I met through the test site, working to end his job, to close down the testing, which finally happened. George Bush the first got us a moratorium, and in January there will be introduced by the Obama government a bill to get a permanent test ban. Jack Kennedy considered his greatest achievement to stop the above ground tests, the mushroom clouds going off. But we had over 1,000 underground tests out there in the Nevada desert. And there will be introduced a resolution to get rid of all nuclear weapons, all tests of nuclear weapons. And that puts us then in line that we can say to countries like Iran, okay, we're getting rid of our nuclear weapons. Please keep from developing any nuclear weapons. But right now, we can't say very much, because we are violating the Non-Proliferation Treaty by not getting rid of the weapons that we have. So we can work in that direction and do it through a sense of this incredible compassionate love for the universe. And it's there. It's there. And Einstein says that if we could get these acts, but into that compression like you do in the nucleus where the love is so strong. The other day I read the other day that there was a meeting, a gathering, I can't remember the organization, but they gave awards, a Christique Award, something like it. It wasn't a religious group, I don't think. They gave awards to people who had risked their lives for others. And they described one, a couple were driving along, there was a train, and a child on the tracks, and the father stopped the car, ran out and grabbed this kid just as the train went by. What an act of love. That room was filled with it was only filled with 16 people that had that kind of love. That's beginning to get MC squared, compassionate love of an intensity that can change the world. The other three people were awarded posthumously because they didn't get out of the way of the train or out of the water or out of the flames. But they still gave that. I heard that story a few mornings ago, and I went to the bus station. I've been traveling town to town on our good Greyhound and now New York Trailways buses. And there was a little tiny little girl, cutest little thing. And they had it was a station that was new, Erie, I think, and a new station. And it had those revolving doors. And this one went, you just got near it and it started spinning. Like doors open up. And that little girl got caught in that door. And she's trying to run back to her mother the wrong way. And her mother's trying to get to her. And I was on the inside. And I thought, well, what would that guy in front of the train do? So I stepped into the door afraid that I was really going to hurt her, the cause of it all, and just grabbed her and got her out of the way. And I felt just a little bit of what he must have felt, that we're all in this together. There's somebody who saw someone fall off a train and it fell right into the tracks. And he could see he wasn't right in between the tracks, so he just fell down on top of him. And both of them were saved. The train went over them. And when people said, how could you do that? You would have been killed. Could have been killed. And he said, wouldn't anybody do that? Wouldn't it be nice if we lived in a world where we could just expect that of anybody, that we would be ready to sacrifice our lives? So we try to operate with that premise. St. Francis did. He went to war where they cut each other up like crazy. In the 13th century. They loved these wars. He wanted to be a big knight. He would win all the awards. But he found out that there's no good war. No good war, no just war. Not even the Crusades. He tried to go to the Crusades. That was the holy war. But there's no holy war. There's no holy war. And Francis saw that and God revealed that to him. So he said, well, he would go check it out. And he went out there to Egypt to see Al-Malik, the Sultan, and he found the Crusaders cutting away at each other, cutting over at the enemies, looting, raping, pillaging, all of those things people do in war. And Francis just was torn to think the Pope's army was behaving like that. Well, they did that and some other bad things like the Inquisition and women and gypsies and all the people that were put to death. He just went right through the line and went to the Sultan. And he said he could only come, he says, in his words, with the love of Jesus. And he just reached him and embraced him. And he shared his understanding of the divine, and so did the Sultan al-Malik. Now, I used to think, well, this is a story the Franciscans have been passing on to make themselves look good for many centuries. But after 9/11, I started going across the street and meeting with Muslim people. There was a mosque right across from our street in San Francisco. And the first day we went over there, we saw a television train there, a car there. I said, what's going on? And saw their windows were broken. And started hearing these stories. But they were just absolutely devastated by what had happened at 9/11. And they were convinced that if there were any Muslims involved, they were going to hell. Because they said it's totally against the Quran to take out innocent people. I wouldn't say that they would automatically go to hell. That's not my Catholic moral teaching. The Catholic moral teaching is I don't know what was going on in their mind. They might have had post-traumatic stress disorder for being in a war battle. They might have been, just out of their mind for whatever reasons. Or they might have at the very last minute, remorse for what was happening. We don't know. But they were convinced, and yet they wanted to convey to the world that this is not what they believed in. And we started doing things together. We went to a funeral for a young man someone got in his taxi. He was driving a taxi, dropped out of school to help his family feed, and he had a turban on. Somebody got in his taxi and, called him raghead or something and shot him in the taxi. And so they gathered. It turned out that he wasn't even Muslim. He was India. Sikh. He was Sikh. And they have a temple, but you can't go in it if you're not a member of the temple. So 200 taxis gathered right off the San Francisco freeway, and we got together, and the parents came, and the mother said, he was so good. She said he did this so he could help the family. The only problem was that he's so good that he'd see people on the way to the store, give them a ride to the store, and buy them groceries. So he didn't get any fares, and what he got, he spent. But there was such a beautiful coming together. And, that feeling that we really, really need to be talking to each other, communicating. My sign here, support our troops, bring them home. I use them out at Creech Air Force Base. And also one that somebody gave me that said, communicate, don't dominate, bring the troops home. That we have to learn how to reach out to each other. So you'll be seeing in a minute or two here my slides of our trip to Iran, where we went testing this out, that if anything's in the crosshairs, it's Iran. That's where everybody thinks, well, that's going to be the next war. And it's a big country, and it's a country that has a very central place to play and role to play in all of the Middle East. And it could be the great hope of the Middle East, of bringing about peace. We have to stop terrifying each other, whether it's the attacks on 9/11 or back the atomic bombs that we dropped. Probably the greatest act of terror in the world was blowing up nuclear bombs in Japan, or shock and awe that was our response to 9/11. And friends of mine that were in Baghdad, Charlie Litke was a chaplain decorated with the Congressional Medal of Honor in Vietnam for carrying out 23 wounded soldiers on his back. He was given the Congressional Medal of Honor, and yet later when he saw what was happening in Vietnam, he had to turn it back in. Well, he was there in Baghdad when the bombs were dropping, trying with Kathy Kelly and a good Franciscan friend of mine, Jerry Zawada, to be with these children who were dropping when these bombs dropped. But Charlie told me, he said, nothing he experienced in Vietnam was the equivalent of those bombs that we dropped the day after 9/11, or as the war on terror began. It wasn't obviously the day after, it was a few months after, but they started falling, and they 2,000 pounds, 300 the first day. He said, never experienced anything like that. And they held the children as they just trembled and the houses shook, and saw the suffering that ensued. And he talked to both the Iraqi soldiers and our own soldiers and told them his story. We are all brothers. We are all sisters. We all have to live together. So we went off to Iran, and I'd like to share that story with you. So the Fellowship of Reconciliation is a wonderful group. They've been around for a long time. They're one of the oldest groups of peace and reconciliation, and they have been trying to reach across to people in Iran. We found that on September 12, 2001, that the day after 9/11, that people from Iran had these kinds of beautiful candles in their windows in support of the people of the United States. And they came to us last year and said, we want to get together to recall that. Not just the 9/11 attack, but the gestures of goodwill the day after. And they did come together. And we had a wonderful gathering in United Nations Plaza, where the United Nations Charter was signed in San Francisco originally, and in other countries, in Las Vegas, etc. And children wrote letters to the children of Iran. And we took some of those with us when we went to Iran to give to the children of Iran, wanting to be friends, wanting to live in peace. And so, whereas President Bush had named the axis of evil, being Soviet Union, China, Libya, our old friends, North Korea, Iran, Iraq, Syria, that they would be an axis of friendship. And that's how I have this button here, and these were made into flyers and given out to many, many people. And we took a banner of this and then some cards of this to Iran as gestures of friendship. We came on friendship. So here's Iran, a big country. You can see it in the green there. Over on the left in purple, I guess, or violet is Iraq. And on the right in purple, I guess, would be Afghanistan. Below it in brown, Pakistan. It's a central player in that whole area and needs to be drawn into a pattern of reconciliation and peace. So here we are, boldly, our little delegation. We only had about 12 of us that had applied, and only 6 got visas from Iran. Jack, who's the older man, older even than me, right by the P on the peace sign, he was a rascal who's been in every kind of venture you could imagine of resistance and all of that. And he got a visa, but his wife didn't. Nobody could figure that out. Anne, who's there, is the only woman that got one. The other lady and the people on the other end just came up to be friendly, which is what we see all along. So that was our banner. It had been on other delegations. A country of religious tolerance, more than we expected. Beautiful cities, wonderful bazaars, beautiful architecture, tiles, and very welcoming people. Tehran, a city of almost 7 million, 6.9 million people, in a land of about 70 million people. It's a very, very dangerous place if you try to cross the street. Oh, the traffic is something. It is something. Anyway, but it's beautiful mountains around it. As you can see, the streets are busy and a very hardworking people. Bazaars. Here are the women. Yes, they are wearing the burqas, chadors, hijabs, and there is fashion police that will go after you if you don't do that. Now, that's part of the controlling government. If you get on the plane, the first thing you see is Nation of Islam. That is what they have chosen. That's what they believe is democracy, their democratic choice to be a religious country. And that's part of the description, is wearing that. When I'll come back in a minute to when we helped the Shah come back in, and he had police out forbidding people to wear those clothes, and then they got rid of him, and the Ayatollah Khomeini came in, and the fashion police came back in again. So you'll see that this is questionable for us, but it's a choice they seem to make. Not everybody makes that choice. Beautiful rugs, an incredible history. They have a great sense of their culture. We don't have much. We only go back a couple hundred years. They go at least a couple thousand years. Xerxes, a great leader. There's his tomb near Persepolis, which was a great city they built in that ancient times, ancient architectural heritage. Beautiful bridges, and this is where they don't have discos. The young people gather in places like these bridges, sing songs, beautiful sense of peace, and clean. Everything in the city was very, very clean. In fact, they said to us, why is it your cities are so poor in America? I hate to say, but they look kind of dirty, and the buses seem so old. And, they really, really respect their surroundings. This is how they do, even not only the mosques, but even some of the government buildings. So you see older ones with this beautiful, beautiful blue tile. Very, very beautiful, all very esteeming. And they have this great sense for religious culture and history. This is Qom. Qom is a city of teaching, of Islamic teaching, and it's where their seminaries are and schools are. And they have this reverence for all the literature, all the books, the holy books, but not just their books, the Quran, but also we saw some ancient texts from some Catholic monasteries and things which they were restoring. Here they are restoring, the worms eat through these things and all that, and they've given their life to taking care of them, but not everybody buys this. Now in the park, we were under the supervision of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and kind of screening who we talked to, but we would go out. Now, my friend David in the middle was the leader of our group. He's a Quaker, David Hartsoe. And when he was 17, his father took him to the lunch counters where Martin Luther King's people were sitting in. 17 years old, he went every day till somebody stuck a knife in his throat and said to him, Honky, you've been here too much. If you keep doing this, I'm going to run this right through your throat if you don't get out of here. And David just looked at him and smiled and said, well, He'd been doing his training in nonviolence, and he said, well, you'll have to do what you have to do, but I'll still love you. And the guy's hands shook, and he dropped the knife and walked out. So David's willing to go anywhere. So we went to the parks and talked to people. Now, this young man's a graduate student, University of Tehran, and he talked to us about America and about everything that was on his mind. He didn't agree with a lot of what the government was doing, but he was very interested in the United States and not necessarily wanting to move there, but to maybe visit, to know what's going on, and to share. That was his hope. The children were just wonderful, and their parents would send them to greet us and didn't pull them away from us or anything. Now, you can notice from the one over in the far corner there that they do get a little of American commercialism over there, because I've been told Tommy, I guess, is a popular brand name for kids' clothes or something. Here's another person that David again met in the park, not afraid to talk to them. David has a shirt on that says in Farsi and in English, "Peace with Iran." You'll see his family of the other fellow in a minute or two. History of Iran. So they say, yes, we want to talk, but you have to talk about what's gone on in our history. And they had a very progressive democratic government that they were very happy with some years back, and Prime Minister Musharraf, and we didn't find him exactly meeting some of our goals, in other words, giving us their oil, etc. So the CIA managed to bring about a coup, and he was deposed, and we helped bring back the Shah, who came in and was a very pretty despotic. I mean, there was lots of people in prison, and just bankrupted the country, gave away its resources to the British and the Russians, mostly the oil. And I was shocked. My father, as was mentioned in the article, was in the fish business, and he always prized as probably the finest delicacy in the world was Persian caviar. And the Shah gave away the rights to all the Persian caviar to Russia for money for he had these incredible affluent parties where he invited royalty from all over Europe and brought in food from Maxim's in Paris and things like that, and bankrupted the country, and they finally ran him out. And then in that vacuum, Ayatollah Khomeini came back from Europe and became the leader, and then there was a much more, what many of us would consider a religiously repressive regime, a much tighter ship. And he just lived in this one room. Now, our guides, kind of a tough-looking guy, huh? I must say. But now, here we are, and the fellow on the right over there, looking up towards that picture, Ali was one of our guides, translators, and actually, I called them my grandsons, he and Saeed, his other friend, how they were just looking out for us in every way, treating us really with loving attention. It was really wonderful. But he was very devoted to the Ayatollah Khomeini, and he's a very practicing Muslim. I felt a little embarrassed because he would, I meant to stay here for a minute long. I felt a little embarrassed because we would be running around all day, and they would stop at noon, and they'd have to go in and wash their feet and then get on the rug and pray. And they were very devout and got up very early in the morning to pray, and really were very, very loving young men. And I admired their religious spirit. But what happened then is the United States, after the Shah and then Ayatollah got in, there was a very bad time because the students took over then the embassy, and they held hostage the people in the embassy for 444 days, which led to Carter's defeat in the election because he couldn't manage to free them. At least that's what it's said. It's really the only reason he didn't win. I don't know. But I was in one of the bazaars, and all the bazaars often he'll have, we're so well known for our peace buttons and all that sort of thing. So they would have a display of, do you want to buy American peace? Well, I don't know why I live in Berkeley. I'm going to go buy peace buttons in Tehran. But they bought, when he saw me looking, he brought out this book of stamps. These were squares of 4 of each kind. But so the first one talks about how the CIA imposed themselves in their country, and they felt the embassy was just a hold-up place for the whole. place for the CIA, which would topple their government again. And then their feeling about how the United States had been involved in this terrible war between 1980 and 1988, in which Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, inspired by the United States and armed by the United States, invaded Iran and caused something like 500,000 to 1 million deaths. And particularly bad was that gave them mustard gas and nerve gas, which are considered weapons of mass destruction. You know, chemical, nuclear, and biological. Yeah. So I just want to see if you're awake. Anyway, so it was really terrible, and those are weapons of mass destruction. Now, just a comment on that, a verification, because I've been around lots of places and lots of people, so you know, you kind of get your knowledge from a lot of different things, and it comes together and you begin to form a picture of what you think is going on in the world. And I was at a wedding several years ago, not too many, but some years ago, and the mother of the bridegroom wanted me to meet their close friends that live next door to them. This is in the peninsula, it's just below San Francisco. And so I met the mother, and she was saying, oh, how she loved it here, living in the United States and all of that. They were from Iran. And she said her husband was a general. And I said, well, is this the first time you've been here? She said, no, we were here for a year some years ago when my husband went to school down in Georgia. Guess where? Fort Benning, but not the School of the Americas. I went over and talked to him a little bit, and he went to the School of the Generals. So at Fort Benning, they have the School of the Americas, but they have the Ranger School there, Paratrooper School there, and the School for our generals. So I talked to him, and he said, oh, the Americans were so wonderful to us. Now, he was the general for the Shah, and the Shah had a general in charge of the troops, and the Shah in terms of the kind of house guards, you know, and his own personal army. And he said that, yes, so they said, your government invited us to come to the general school. And I went there and learned how to engage in chemical, biological, and nuclear warfare. This is direct words. And he said, and so then I went back and taught my officers how to engage in nuclear, chemical, and biological warfare. Imagine that. So now we're saying, what, they're trying to make nuclear bombs, or they're interested in nuclear bombs. Well, we were the ones who got him started on that course. Some of those young officers that he had, that he was training, probably are some of those that are in command at this point. So it's not surprising that it would be on the agenda, but the International Agency of Atomic Energy denies that they have in any way developed or are developing nuclear weapons at this time. Another tragedy of that time of the war is that our latest cruisers were the Aegis cruisers, which had a very, very elaborate radar system, the most elaborate ever conceived, that could cover all the air, land, sea, and air, and maybe underwater too. And they were trying to keep the channels open for the tankers to go through during the war, which we had helped instigate. And they wanted to play their part. And this was the newest, hottest cruiser out there, so they wanted to be an ace, you know, like in the old wars. Remember World War II? They wanted to be an ace and have all these pictures on the front of the nose of their plane of all the planes they'd shot down. And so they got a blip on the screen one day, and they called the captain and said there was an unidentified blip there, a plane, and he said, well, what is it? Tell me what it is. And the guy didn't really know. And he said, well, it looks like it could be an F-14, which is a fighter plane. And he said, well, is it headed towards us? And he said, well, I don't know, maybe it could be. And he said, shoot it down. And he gave orders to shoot it down. Well, as you can see in the picture, from this Iranian stamp, it was an Iranian airliner taken off from Tehran and heading towards Dubai, and 290 people were shot down in that plane. Now that sounds preposterous to most of you, but I was in the Air Force in air defense. We were scrambled to shoot down a Russian bomber. Same idea. A danger to Chicago or Detroit. We were in that area there. And we were ordered to shoot it down. Myself, I was the backseat guy handling the radar and so forth, navigator, there's a pilot in the front. And we started talking about it. He said, are you sure it's a bomber? And they said, oh, absolutely. You sure? Yes. They said, well, we kept asking that question of the ground radar, this type of person who found the blip here. And so then we got closer, and we just said, we just got to go look. So in those old planes, they were jets, F-94s, that you had to pull up alongside if you wanted to identify it. And then if you identified it, if you didn't saw it was an enemy, it was really hard to get back because you had to shoot them down from a 90-degree angle. So when they kept saying do a firing pass, they were talking about coming in at a 90-degree angle. And we just said to ourselves, you just couldn't do that. So we went and came alongside, and then we called back, now you're sure it's a Russian bomber. We've tracked it all the way over the pole for 9 hours. We know. Do a firing pass. We said, well, we're right beside him, and what are these ladies waving out the window at us? It was an American airliner. Just like that, we would have shot it down. That would have been us. I would have had to live with that for the rest of my life. I would have fired the missile, aimed the missile, whatever it is. And whereas, this boat had been anxious to get a kill. We were anxious not to kill anyone. I had actually refused or said I did not want to be in bombers because after learning about what nuclear weapons could do, like wipe out all of Moscow or something, I didn't want to do that. I was willing to be part of shooting down bombers, but not dropping the bombs. Well, after this, I think is where I began to get a kind of a whole change in my whole understanding of life and world, that there's no good role in war. There's no good war. And when you start shooting down, you're thinking as a bomber, you might be shooting down an airliner. When you start thinking you're saving the world, you might be destroying it. So there was at that time a reaction against the den of espionage, the U.S. Embassy, and this is still there, these signs, we will make America face severe defeat, meaning really what they mean by those kind of signs is America will suffer if they try to defeat us, however it happens, but that's still there. It's the only place you see these signs in Tehran, that's the capital, but it is a way of showing their concern at that time for our role in the war. There's a Star of David they put, this is something else, a graffiti they put on the wall, showing that they consider Israel like a state of the United States, because they know that they are sponsored and supported by the United States. So we tried to bring a different page, a page of friendship. By the way, they wanted to, some of the radical groups wanted to turn the U.S. Embassy into some other use, and the Ayatollah said, no, they will be back. And that's where our mission of friendship is. And we're so happy to see that President Obama has called for that, opening diplomatic relationships. Let's talk. As one of the signs somebody made for me says, communicate, don't dominate. We have to talk, we have to communicate, we have to be acts of friendship. So here we are. Now people say, yes, but I had one of these talks and somebody got up and said, but Islam is the only religion that says you have to kill Christians and you have to kill this and you have to kill this and you have to kill this. Well, Qom, as I mentioned before, Qom is the ultimate Islamic school, probably in all the Mid-East. They have the best professors. We met with them. As I mentioned, one of the people has been trying to get them from the FSC to come over and have a conference with us, but we can't get the professors from Qom visas to come into the United States to talk about their theology, what the Quran really teaches. These are Mennonites. Mennonites is an ancient peace church, peace community, and they have been studying the Quran with the experts, the top experts that teach to Mennonite, to the clergy, etc., of the Islamic religion, teach what the Quran really teaches. And these Mennonites have been studying, and this is like their third year, something like that, and they are very, very, very impressed with the teachings of the Quran and the dedication. So much of it comes from our own Bible, our own scriptures. But they are not dupes, and they're not at all being duped, but they have been doing this, and other Mennonites have been joining them and living among the Muslims and appreciating them. This young man on the end here is, we were all older ones And somebody called him, that he must have been the guide for our elder hostel group. So anyway, but we were very impressed with what they were finding. But there are other groups now. Here's young people, a gift of peace and friendship from Miles for Peace. They call themselves Miles for Peace. So some of our members had met them in Europe, bicycling all across Europe, trying to say, as people from Iran, we want peace. We want to live in friendship and peace. Others saw them come into San Francisco on their bicycles, bicycling across the country to say, we want peace. This top, where is he there, right? The tallest guy, not the first one, the second one there in the green shirt, was swimming across the Bay of Hormuz to say to people on the other side, outside of Iraq, in Iran, we want peace. Very friendly, and our hands were holding like these glass doves they gave us. Very eager. Everybody you meet in Iran, even in the shops, they give you presents. They're very, very, very friendly. They're known as the most friendly people in the world, and they are. Or we're friendly too. But they're just doing everything they can. Those are the little cards that we had, the small copies of that big one I had that we left as tokens, and they give us something so we can keep in contact. Another group, they call themselves Messengers of Peace. Now, it's true that there's a kind of a guardedness of the government on what they call velvet revolution, or some call it soft revolution. In other words, what we call nonviolence, that they call that, but that's revolution and subversive. And they're teaching our college students that. And we heard there was a doctor who was put in prison, just like that journalist we just heard about, for teaching students about the Velvet Revolution. Well, they are guarded about what they do. They do teach things. They teach Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, which is a wonderful thing. Marshall Rosenberg, he's a great specialist in nonviolence and its communication. And he teaches that all over the world. He's Jewish originally. He's been in Palestine. He's been in Israel. He works with them all on nonviolent communication, and with little children and with families. Incredible work. But they do that. The front is that they're teaching, their own language to the people, but at the same time, they're passing on the Velvet Revolution. David was going around passing out films and all on Gandhi and the Orange Revolution and so forth, and really risking himself to do that he could be thrown in prison, and me too for being with him. But he really was determined to spread the good word, and they were responding so well and so eagerly to any ways that they could be spreading nonviolence and peace. Now, there were all these college students. I said, when I first saw this, I said, oh my God, that looks like a nun's class of about 50 years ago, the new novice class. All these young girls in habits, black habits. And I'd see them on the street, and that always evoked that every time. I'd say, gee, those nuns look so young. But they were college students. Well, I know that if we had a bunch of college students here, they would not be happy to have to wear all those clothes to class. They certainly wouldn't be in California. I don't know about back here in New York, but anyway, that's what they did have to wear. And that is a problem. And many of them feel that way, but you can't really say that they look terribly oppressed. They may feel some of that, and there are probably places they go that they don't wear all that. But anyway, they were just totally fascinated with Anne, wanting to know all about America, and she's a Quaker, and she talks very strongly about, the ways of nonviolence and the ways of peace. The terrible thing was that war between 80 and 88 and the effects of it. And so the directors of the Foreign Affairs Ministry set us up a meeting with them, and you can see the one in the wheelchair has nothing below the hip, and from the effects of the chemicals, etc. And he had tears coming down his eyes when we walked up, because one of his closest friends from the war had just died that day, even some years later. So they're setting up a memorial in Iran. This is on that pillar right there. And this is the head doctor in the country who's setting up this, the effects of the war, setting up a museum for peace. And there's the results of the mustard gas and all that came from Fort Dix, from the United States, most probably, and what it did. That's what weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, nuclear, can do. Here was where, very interesting, we had this wonderful meeting with the people, and we shared our stories, and David shared the fact that he's Quaker and that his mother used to go to Fort Dix, where those weapons come from, in New Jersey, and vigil there. And so he was telling about how she went just every day that she wasn't working, and they had moved from New Jersey to Oregon. And so she was in a store one day, and this man came up to her and said, were you ever down there in New Jersey at Fort Dix? And she said, well, yes, I used to vigil there. And he said, well, I want you to know you're the reason I quit making bombs there. You know, so we do vigiling and we do these things and all that, and we think, what good does this do? What good does this do? Well, I know from my vigiling at the test site, I became very good friends with the person who ran the whole Nevada test site out there. We became very close friends. He became a big advocate for what we were doing. And when Tom Gumbleton came, Bishop Gumbleton, and crossed the line, he did too. So he became an advocate for peace. He died of cancer, and most of us feel that that was from his long career. He was the one who was up in a cloud taking pictures with a lens he had developed of the first H-bomb that went off. And when it went off, he was sure it was the end of the world, that really, though it would never stop, there was always that fear that the chain reaction wouldn't start. And he was convinced that that was happening. But he became, like these people, advocates of peace. She cried when we told our stories, and she said, I've heard Americans say something about the war, but I've never been touched as I have hearing your stories. So in August, I'm going to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's my next big trip. I'll be back with a news show next year. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, you know, just to say we have to work together. You've felt the heat. We have to account for it. The young man on the end there, the man on the end, is a filmmaker, and he was a pilot of a captain of a ship, but an Iranian ship similar to the one that shot down the airplane. And as a captain of a ship, he could not understand how that captain could have shot down an airliner. And so he kept trying to find out, and he did research even in the United States. And Newsweek magazine had a study of that, about that mentality of having to achieve and show that you could get a kill, that you could bring down a plane, etc. Now, eager that captain was to do that. The difference between that captain and the pilot I flew with and myself was that he was eager to show that they could shoot down a plane. I had avoided being in bombers because I was so afraid of getting a kill, a win, and so we were so cautious that we saved the people on that plane. So it is something about learning not how to engage with people in violence of war, but in nonviolent ways. We met not just with people in parks. These were members of parliament. It would be like going to Washington and meeting with Congress people, which is very difficult to do. Any of you have done, that's why we're just watching Medea Benjamin accosting Secretary Rumsfeld at the awards the other night for the president, that how they do go and just try to meet people wherever they can, because it's very hard to get an appointment to sit down with a congressperson. But they met, we went to their parliament. These are actual members of parliament who represent various minority religions instead of a state or something. That's who they represent in their parliament, but they're actual members of parliament. They also have women representatives, special representatives, because they don't have that many elected by the government. But anyway, they spent about an hour and a half, 2 hours with us, and again, just constantly concerned about peace. One represents the Jews, Zoroastrians, which is their oldest religion, Armenian and Assyrian Christians, which are the major Christian denominations. And the one that was Jewish, representing the Jewish talk, I showed you the young Max, the young 24-year-old, he just really leaned on him. He says, Max, you have to talk to the Jewish constituency in the United States about, you know, what is going on, like in Gaza, what was going on at the time, that it's the only way to peace, or we are going to end up in, you know, nuclear war, I guess. Discuss. They have this all over their building, these kinds of signs. And as I said, the sign somebody made for me. Communication, not domination. So finally we say farewell to our friends. And so there's Iran right there. But one little sticky wicket that still lies is Iran trying to develop nuclear weapons. And the International Agency on Atomic Energy, as I said, says no, they are not. They are eager to develop a nuclear reactor because they have a lot of oil, but they don't have refineries, they need more energy. They have every right to do it because they are signers of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which gives them the right, as long as they abide by that, to develop nuclear reactors, and they do it under the eyes of the international agency, and that seems to be agreed upon by the agency. Nevertheless, they're surrounded by countries that have nuclear weapons. It would not be terribly surprised, especially since we had taught them how to do it years ago, if they moved in that direction, and that's why we have to do everything we can to build bridges of peace. What are we doing, though, in response? On our side, this is not directed yet at Iran, but this is our newest wave, and that is drones. So we came back here, and then we went to Nevada, and Judy and George came. We have a peace march every year out to the Nevada test site from Las Vegas, and we went on the way out is Creech Air Force Base. This plane is located in Afghanistan or Pakistan. It bombs Afghanistan and Pakistan, but it is really operated by a pilot and a not exactly a co-pilot, but the job like I had in the back seat of a fighter plane that directs the intercepts, etc. And he is the cameraman, because the most important thing they have on the front there is these very expensive cameras that they can take these very intense pictures from very high up, and then they send it through satellite back to Nevada, to that trailer, and they can figure out where the target should be. And then they operate, and this young person who's usually like 19 years old, the pilot has been trained and been in combat, but the sensor operator is just out of training, out of boot camp, but their experience has been arcades, you know, playing games of shooting down planes, and now this is for real. Do they really consciously know the difference? We call them hunter-killer platforms. So our way of relating to the people of Iran and Pakistan is to send hunter-killer platforms called Grim Reapers. And so we were very disturbed at this, and we are finding out the commander himself talked, and he was on 60 Minutes, by the way, last Sunday, if you saw that. He didn't tell the whole story. He didn't tell the story. He told reporters that was in the paper about the problem of these young people that are directing the intercepts, directing the missiles, that are having problems, and that he's had to get more psychologists and chaplains to help them with what we call post-traumatic stress disorder, because there was one case where they blew up a school, 30 children were killed. In F-16s, you drop your bomb and you keep going, you never see what you've done. But in traditional bombing, these drones stay there for hours and hours. They can stay 10, 20 hours, depending on, this is the bigger one, the smaller ones can stay about 24, these stay about 10, and the crew are on for 12 hours. So they are watching, after they drop the bomb, they see, excuse me, but the body parts, etc., the place blown up, the people running, scurrying, people fleeing the neighborhood. I mean, they see all of that. And then they're going to go. The commander, when he told me about this, that same commander that was on TV last year at the air show, he said, well, it really works out wonderfully. They live in Las Vegas with their families. They come out to the base. They fly their missions, drop their bombs, and then they can go home and have dinner with their children. After you blew up a school, how does anybody do that? So for their sake as well, we have to say, no, 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 no. That kid in the back row of the hall, I keep seeing him waving, no, no, I don't want to do that. So we were out there vigiling, ground the drones, lest we reap the whirlwind. That's a scriptural quote. But today I think we would call the whirlwind an all-out nuclear nightmare. So that's what we were doing. It was not total. They were very friendly. They kept waving at us, going in and out. It was amazing. See them nodding their heads. We just couldn't get over how friendly they were. No trespassing. Well, actually, this is at the test site where we went on Easter Sunday for the same reasons, to say no to nuclear weapons. Back at Creech, this is where the drones were being operated from, through these gates, past America's finest warriors. By the way, the drones, they fly drones right there for training. But the ones that they're operating, that are bombing in Afghanistan, and they operate out of the trailers, are actually over in Afghanistan or Pakistan. So here we are getting arrested. The three of us that are getting arrested right there are all septuagenarians. Brad Little's a very famous activist of many years. Is one with the blue cap is my good Franciscan friend, Jerry Zawad. I'm over on the other side, I think. That's one of the state troopers putting handcuffs on. They know us because we've been out there a lot. But the scary thing is we went through this gate right here. We walked on. We brought pizza and flatbread, which is very popular in Iran, and said, we want to talk. We'd written letters. We want to come and talk. And so we went inside and then sat down. And then these soldiers that came up were very nervous, not the regular guards, but the soldiers. It's obvious that they just came back from being over there because they were very nervous, and they kept pointing their M16s at us. There's one little lady, Vitale, who jumped up, and she's very eager, young 80-year-older, who ran running out. She said, I'm going to go talk to him. I'm going to go talk to him. Let me go talk to him. And it grabbed her and kept saying, one more step. And later, Kathy Kelly asked the sergeant, one of these sergeants that are the state troopers that know us, said, would they really have shot? Would they have shot me if I kept going up there? And he said, yes. And she said, well, would that be a crime? She said, no, and explained why. They were protecting that base. And she says, well, would it have been a shame? And he said, yes. So, but that's the danger that we have. So, Pace, Bene, nonviolent service, peace and good. So we were started about 20 years. Our 20th anniversary is coming up in about a month, and 4 months, and we're inviting people to come and celebrate. Maybe some of you have been out to Nevada. We're going to have a great celebration and talk about how can we expand our work for peace. We have lots of education programs, and we have resources in the back. We're going to take a break now, and you can check out the resources and see things that are ways to peace and ways we can work together. This is, I think it's Fort Bene. I don't know, I'm not sure where we were, actually. I just wanted to show, in fact, I was going to say, somebody said they saw Kathy Kelly getting arrested there at the, how they go in there. And I was with some Code Pink people, and we went in, Stop the Torture. That's when Gonzalez and all, they were in there talking about the waterboarding is fine, doesn't hurt anybody. And so we were there, but that's one of the advantages of being in our country, that you might get caught, but they don't do anything too bad. They don't kill you anyway. And there it is.